Hey, Tere, and welcome to Shadows of Thales. I'm glad you found your way here tonight. This little corner where darkness softens, and stories breathe quietly in the background. Before we drift into tonight's tale, feel free to like the video and subscribe, but only if what you hear truly feels right for you. Your comfort matters more than anything else. If you'd like, share in the comments where you're watching from and what time the night found you. I love seeing how our growing community gathers from so many different places. It's a reminder that even in silence, we're connected. I hope you'll allow this video to accompany you for a while. Every story here is shaped to ease your thoughts, soothe your mind, and guide you gently into the late hours with a touch of mystery and calm. So go ahead, lower the lights, make yourself comfortable, take a slow breath, let the noise of the day melt away. And now, let's step into tonight's story together. The forest was familiar during the day. I'd walked its paths, countless times, wide trails etched into the soil, markers carved into trees, bends I could navigate without thinking. Locals used it as a shortcut between villages. Children played near its edge. Nothing about it ever seemed dangerous, but that all changed at night. I entered just before sunset, confident, unafraid. The air was calm, the path straight, the trees standing exactly where they always had. I followed the main trail, my boots crunching softly over dry leaves, trusting my memory more than my sight. At first, nothing felt wrong at all. Then, the light faded. As dusk bled into true darkness, the forest seemed to tighten around me. Not physically, the trees didn't move, but the space itself felt different. The distance between trunks felt subtly altered, as if the forest were folding inward on itself. Shadows deepened, stretching longer than they should have, bending at angles that just didn't match the terrain. I stopped and turned around. The path behind me was gone, not hidden by the dark, not obscured by a fallen log. Gone! Where the trail should have been, there was now a dense, impassable tangle of roots and undergrowth I had never seen before in my life. I frowned, certain I must have taken a wrong turn, though I couldn't remember making one. So, I walked forward instead. The trail ahead reappeared, but it was narrower now, and subtly curved. The trees leaned inward, their trunks tilted just enough to feel unnatural, almost intentional. Primera followed it, my heart still steady, but my senses on high alert. I kept telling myself that all forests change their appearance in low light. It was just a trick of the mind. Then I noticed something impossible. The moss on the trees had shifted sides. I stopped beside a large oak. One I remembered clearly. During the day, a thick blanket of moss clung to its northern face. Now, it coated the opposite side, thick and damp in the night air. I circled the tree slowly. The rough bark felt the same. The ground was unchanged. Only direction itself had betrayed me. My instinct was to look up, to check the stars for guidance. They were wrong. Constellations I'd known my whole life were distorted, stretched out of shape, rotated slightly out of place. They weren't drifting across the sky, they were rearranged, as if the heavens themselves had adjusted to the forest's will. I felt a subtle, unnerving pull in my chest, like a compass needle twitching wildly without ever settling. My own sense of orientation, north, south, distance, even memory at all, began to loosen its grip. So I walked again. Each step felt correct. It felt natural. Yet every few minutes, the forest quietly corrected me. Paths would curve when I wasn't looking. Clearings would shift their position. Trees that I had just passed moments ago would suddenly appear again up ahead of me, unchanged, almost as if they were watching. And that's when I realized the horrifying truth. The forest didn't trap people by blocking the exits. It trapped them by changing where the exits led. Desperate, I tried to mark my way. I took out my knife and scratched a symbol deep into the bark of a nearby tree. The sound was sharp, loud in the dead quiet of the night air. I turned my back, took 5 deliberate steps, then looked over my shoulder. The tree was unmarked. Or maybe it was no longer the same tree. The forest was subtle. It didn't move violently. It just adjusted reality in increments too small to notice until it was far, far too late. Direction slipped away, First 10 distance, then memory. I felt watched not by eyes, but by alignment. As long as I walked in the direction the forest seemed to prefer, the path remained clear and easy. But the moment I hesitated, the moment I questioned where I was going, the trail would narrow, twist, and correct me. Night deepened. I could no longer tell how long I had been walking. Time, just like direction, had softened, become meaningless. I just followed the path because it existed, because it was the only thing that allowed me to keep moving forward. And somewhere between one step and the next, I finally understood the terrifying rule of this place in Tease. Forest the night did not hide the way he'd rewrote Italiano. I walked for what felt like hours, or maybe minutes. The moon, when I could see it through the canopy, seemed to hang motionless. The only sound was my own breathing and the soft crunch of my footsteps. The forest had become a living map that redrew itself with every step I took. There was no escape, because there was no out. Teddy was only through. At one point, I came to a small stream. I knew this stream. During the day, it flowed east. I knelt down, dipped my hand in the cold water, and watched a leaf float by. It was flowing west. The forest hadn't just changed its layout, it had reversed its own nature. I stood up, a cold dread washing over me that had nothing to do with the water. The pull in my chest grew stronger, a silent command to keep moving, to follow the path laid out for me. To resist felt impossible. Once, I tried to force my way through the trees, to leave the path and make my own. After just a few feet, the undergrowth became so thick it was like a solid wall. The branches seemed to interlock, thorns snagging my clothes. When I turned back, defeated, the path was wider than before, more inviting, as if rewarding me for my compliance. It was teaching me its rules. I saw no animals, heard no birds, not even the hum of insects. The silence was absolute, a heavy blanket that smothered all sound except my own. The world outside this forest might as well have not existed. I was in a bubble of shifting reality, completely alone. Or was I? The feeling of being watched was constant. It was the presence of the trees themselves, the way they aligned, the way the path guided my feet. The entire forest was a single, conscious entity, and I was a piece on its ever-changing board. My mind started to play tricks on me. I'd see a flicker of movement in my peripheral vision, but when I'd turn, there was nothing. I'd hear a faint whisper that sounded like my own name, but it was just the wind rustling leaves that weren't there. My memories of the outside world, of my life before I stepped into these woods, began to feel distant and faded, like an old photograph. The only thing that felt real was the path under my feet, and the silent, inexorable pull forward. Then, something changed. Ahead of me, the path split into two identical forks. For the first time, the forest was offering me a choice. Both trails looked the same, narrow, winding, disappearing into the oppressive darkness. There was no indication which was right or wrong. The pull in my chest split as well. A strange tug in two different directions. I stood there for a long time, frozen by indecision. Which way was I supposed to go? Was this a test? A trap? Or was the forest simply bored? I closed my eyes, trying to listen to some long-forgotten instinct. But there was nothing, only the deep, profound silence. I chose the path on the right. I don't know why. It was a completely random decision. As soon as I took a single step, the path on the left vanished. It didn't fade. It was just gone, replaced by a row of ancient, gnarled pines that looked like they had been there for a century. The forest had accepted my choice, or perhaps it had made me believe I had a choice at all. The path ahead began to climb. It grew steeper, and the air grew colder. I felt a change in the atmosphere, a subtle thinning of the oppressive weight, and then I saw it. A faint, pale light ahead. Not the cold, alien light of the rearranged stars, but a soft, gentle glow. Hope, a feeling I had forgotten, flickered in my chest. I hurried forward, stumbling over roots, my legs atching. The light grew brighter, resolving into the familiar shape of a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a single, ancient lantern hanging from a low branch, casting a warm, steady circle of light. It looked out of place, a man-made object in this wild, impossible place. As I stepped into the circle of light, the oppressive feeling of being watched vanished. The pull in my chest ceased. I turned around and looked back the way I had come. There was no path, only a solid, impenetrable wall of trees. The forest had let me go, or at least, it had brought me here. I looked around the clearing. It was small, perfectly circular. The grass was soft under my feet. It felt safe, peaceful. But I knew this wasn't the way out. This was just another room in the forest's impossible house. I sank to the ground, exhausted, my back against a tree within the lantern's glow. I didn't know if I had been walking for hours or for days. I didn't know what would happen when the lantern's fuel ran out, but for now, I was still, and in the silence of that strange, warm light, I finally understood. The forest didn't just change direction, it changed people. It stripped away everything you thought you knew, leaving you with only one truth. You go where it tells you to go. The real trap wasn't getting lost in the woods. It was forgetting that there was ever a world outside of them. As I closed my eyes, I wondered if I would ever remember the way back. Or if, when I woke up, I would simply start walking again. A willing pilgrim on a path that led nowhere and everywhere, forever. I slowed my pace, trying to anchor myself to something familiar, the rhythm of my own steps, the sound of my breathing, the weight of the air against my skin. But this forest, it didn't care for anchors. It responded only to motion. The path curved gently to the left, then straightened, then curved again. Each adjustment was so subtle, I would have sworn it was always that way. I decided to test it. I stopped abruptly, and the forest paused with me. The leaves hung completely motionless. The shadows froze. It was eerie, like the world was holding its breath. Then, I tried to take a step backward. The ground resisted. It wasn't a physical barrier, more like a perceptual one. My sense of balance tilted, as if the very concept of backward no longer existed in this place. The forest simply wouldn't allow it. So I stepped forward again, and just like that, the resistance vanished. The message was crystal clear. Keep moving forward. So, I followed. As I walked, trees I thought I recognized appeared again, but they were spaced differently, angled slightly off from how my memory insisted they should be. A fallen log I had stepped over earlier now lay to my right, not my left. I reached out and touched it. The bark was warm, strangely warm, as though it had just been moved. I whispered into the air, testing it. North. The word felt meaningless as it left my mouth. It wasn't swallowed by the silence. It was just emptied, like a label peeled off a jar, leaving nothing behind. The concept of north didn't exist here. I glanced at my watch. The hands were turning. Yes, but the seconds didn't feel like seconds. Each one seemed to stretch or compress depending on how quickly I moved. When I hurried, time thickened around me, becoming dense and heavy. When I slowed, it loosened, becoming almost fluid. The forest wasn't just changing direction, it was redefining sequence itself. It was playing with the very fabric of time. I needed a different strategy. I closed my eyes and walked 10 steps, trusting my muscle memory alone to guide me. When I opened them, the path was gone. I was standing in a tight cluster of trees, their trunks arranged in a near-perfect circle around me. There were no openings, no trail, just enough space for me to stand. The forest hadn't blocked my way. It felt more like it had completed it, like a sentence reaching its final period. My pulse quickened, a frantic drum against my ribs. The trees seemed to lean inward slightly, not in a threatening way, but with a kind of patient attention. They were waiting to see if I understood. I took a long, slow breath, trying to calm my racing heart. And then I took a step without choosing a direction. I just stepped, and the path returned. It unfolded right ahead of me, smooth and obvious, as if it had always been there. The trees relaxed, their postures straightening. The circle dissolved. I had been rewarded for surrender. A sudden understanding settled over me like cold morning dew. The forest didn't want decisions. It wanted acceptance. Those who chose their own paths were corrected. Those who questioned direction were turned around. Only those who walked without intention were allowed to move forward. So I continued. But this time I wasn't trying to orient myself. I wasn't looking for landmarks or checking for north. I simply let the path decide for me. With every step I took, the forest grew calmer. The shadows soft. The air lightened just a little, though the night remained deep and dark. Eventually, without any announcement, the trees thinned, and I stepped out onto a familiar dirt road. The forest edge stood behind me, looking perfectly ordinary, silent, and still. I turned back one last time. Nothing moved. Nothing shifted. It looked like any other forest at night. But I knew that in the darkness, it was still rearranging itself. Not to trap people, not to threaten them, but to test them, to see who insisted on trusting their own sense of direction, and who could learn to walk without it. I walked home without looking back, careful not to think in terms of left or right, north or south, because I understood now, some places do not want to be navigated. They want to be followed. This experience changed how I see the world, how I see the paths we take in life. Sometimes, the best way forward is to let go of the map and just trust the journey. If you've ever felt lost, maybe the answer isn't to fight for control, but to simply surrender and see where the path leads. I noticed it at sunset. The light was perfect low, amber, stretching long shadows across the clearing. Every tree obeyed the rule of evening. Pines cast thin, jihadi shapes. Oaks spread wide, dark silhouettes across the ground. Even the rocks had shadows, small and sharp. Except one tree. It stood near the center of the clearing, tall and straight, its bark pale compared to the others. Sunlight touched it clearly. Leaves rustled gently at its crown. But beneath it there was nothing, no shadow. I stepped closer, certain my angle was wrong. I circled it slowly. The sun remained visible between the branches. The ground beneath stayed evenly lit, untouched by darkness. The longer I looked, the more wrong it felt. Shadows are automatic. They don't decide. They simply happen. This tree refused them. I reached out and touched the bark. It was cool, smoother than it should have been, almost like stone worn down by time. My fingers left faint marks in the dust, but even my hand's shadow vanished when it crossed the tree's base. I pulled back instinctively. The forest around me was quiet, but not unnaturally so. Birds still called in the distance. Wind moved the canopy. Yet everything near the tree felt excluded, as if light behaved differently here, obeying a rule I couldn't see. I tested it. I dropped my backpack at the base of the trunk. The bag had no shadow either. Not beneath the tree, not beside Italiano. It was as though darkness could not exist within a certain radius. I felt exposed. Shadows hide small things. They soften edges. Without them, everything feels too clear, too visible. I realized my own shadow shortened unnaturally as I stood closer, thinning, fading. I stepped back. It returned instantly. The tree remained unchanged. Still light, still present, still wrong. I remembered something an old man once told me when I was a child. Some things don't cast shadows because they re not fully here. At the time, I'd laughed. Now, standing before the tree, I didn't feel like laughing at all. I noticed marks carved faintly into the bark lines, and symbols so shallow they were almost invisible unless the light hit them just right. Old carvings, many hands, many years. Some crossed out. Some unfinished names, maybe, or warnings. As the sun dipped lower, the forest grew longer with darkness. Shadows stretched everywhere except here. The tree remained untouched by night's approach, as if evening simply skipped it. I realized something then that made my stomach tighten. Night was coming, and when darkness arrived, this tree would still have nowhere to put it. I couldn't leave. Not yet. Curiosity is a powerful thing. more powerful than fear sometimes. I backed away to the edge of the clearing, where my own shadow was long and reassuring, and watched. The last sliver of the sun disappeared behind the hills. The sky deepened to a bruised purple. The forest filled with the soft, gray light of twilight. The other trees became dark, indistinguishable. Their shadows melted into the growing darkness on the ground, becoming one. But the shadowless tree, it began to glow. It wasn't a bright, magical light. It was faint, internal. A soft, pearlescent sheen emanated from the pale bark, making the tree stand out against the encroaching night. It was like moonlight, but the moon wasn't up yet. This light came from within. The air around it grew colder, not just the normal chill of evening, but a deep, penetrating cold that seemed to radiate from the tree itself. I pulled my jacket tighter. The forest sounds began to die down. The birds were silent now. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The only sound was the faint, dry rustle of the tree's own leaves. I fumbled for my phone, wanting to capture this, to prove to myself it was real. I aimed the camera, but the screen showed only darkness where the tree stood. It was like a blind spot in the world, visible to my eyes, but invisible to technology. I lowered the phone, my hand trembling slightly. This was beyond a simple trick of the light. This was something ancient and fundamental. The carved symbols on the bark seemed to pulse with a faint glow, becoming slightly more defined. I squinted, trying to make them out. They weren't letters from any alphabet I knew. They were more like pictograms, telling a story I couldn't read. One carving was clearer than the rest. It showed a circle, with lines radiating outwards, like a sun. But inside the circle was another shapeless spiral, twisting inward to a single point. A warning, a map, or maybe an instruction. As full night descended, the tree's glow intensified, just enough to illuminate the ground immediately around it. It created a perfect circle of soft, cold light in the heart of the dark forest. It was its own source of day in a world of night. But it felt wrong. It wasn't a beacon of hope. It was a mark of isolation, a place that refused to join the rest of the world in its nightly slumber. And then I saw it. At the very edge of the glowing circle, something moved. It was small at first, just a flicker in my peripheral vision. I froze, straining to see. It was a shadow, but it wasn't cast by anything. It was a patch of pure, animate darkness, detaching itself from the edge of the woods and creeping slowly, cautiously, toward the light. It moved like a liquid, flowing over the roots and fallen leaves, its edges undefined and shifting. It was drawn to the tree, or maybe it was drawn to the light the tree produced. I held my breath. The shadow reached the perimeter of the glow and stopped. It hesitated, wavering, as if touching a barrier it couldn't cross. The light from the tree seemed to push back against it, keeping it at bay. Another shadow emerged from the woods, and then another. Soon, the entire clearing, just outside the tree's circle of light, was filled with them. They were shapes without form, darkness given life. They surrounded the tree, a silent, patient siege. They couldn't enter the light, but they pressed against its boundary, a tide of blackness, waiting. I understood then. The tree didn't cast a shadow because it held its own light. It was a sanctuary, a last bastion against the things that moved in the dark. The old man's words echoed in my mind again. Not fully here. Maybe the tree wasn't fully in our world. Maybe it was a doorway, and the light it held was a key, keeping the door shut against whatever was on the other side. The carvings weren't warnings. They were names. The names of those who had stood here before, who had perhaps tended this light, who had watched the shadows gather at the edge of the clearing, just as I was doing now. And I realized my place wasn't at the edge of the clearing, watching. My place was inside the circle. With a heart pounding against my ribs, I took a step forward, out of the familiar darkness and into the tree's strange, cold light. As I crossed the invisible line, the gathered shadows recoiled, pulling back as if burned. They swirled and writhed, their silent frustration a palpable force. I walked to the base of the tree and put my hand on its smooth, glowing bark. It was no longer just cool. It was humming with a low, deep vibration, a thrum of ancient power that resonated up my arm and into my chest. Looking out from the safety of the light, I saw the true nature of the forest at night. It wasn't empty, it was full. And it was hungry. I stood there, a new guardian in a war one never knew existed, wondering how many nights I would have to stand watch, and wondering what would happen on the night the light finally went out. I looked at the names carved into the bark and found an empty space. It felt like it was waiting for me. Night arrived quietly. The sun slipped below the horizon, and darkness flowed into the forest like water filling a hollow. Shadows deepened, stretched, and merged. The clearing should have become uneven with darkness but around the tree. The ground remained pale, unchanged, as if light itself refused to leave. I stood at the edge of that brightness, afraid to step closer. The contrast was unsettling. Beyond the invisible boundary, the forest had depth layers of shadow where things could hide. But near the tree, everything was exposed. Too visible, too clear. I noticed something else then. The shadows were not just avoiding the tree. They were pulling away from it. The darkness between the surrounding trunks thickened, retreating outward, as if giving the tree space. The night seemed uncomfortable near it, unwilling to touch what could not hold it. I took a cautious step forward. My shadow thinned again, stretching behind me, clinging to my heels like it didn't want to follow. With another step, it snapped away entirely. Primera looked down nothing. My feet were visible. My body was solid. But the familiar shape that proved I existed in space was gone. A strange dizziness washed over me. Without a shadow, I felt lighter, less interred, as if some part of me had been detached and left behind at the edge of the clearing. The tree's bark pulsed faintly, not with light, but with absence. It wasn't glowing. It was refusing to darken. I realized the tree wasn't rejecting shadow. It was consuming the very concept of it. I reached for my backpack, took it off my shoulders. Still no shadow. I lifted it, dropped it. Nothing changed. The ground beneath remained evenly lit, untouched by depth. Then I noticed movement. At the edge of the clearing, shadows began to gather unnaturally, pooling together where they overlapped. Not shapes of trees or branches, but something denser, thicker. They twisted slightly, as if trying to reclaim what had been taken from them. I understood with sudden clarity the shadows weren't gone. They were displaced. Everything the tree could not hold was being pushed outward, compressed into the forest beyond, and those shadows were growing restless. The carvings in the bark caught my eye again. Some were deep gouges, frantic and uneven. Others were careful, deliberate names scratched over names. Some crossed out violently. I recognized a pattern now. Those who stayed too long had tried to leave their mark, to prove they were there, even after their shadow was gone. They had tried to leave their shadow behind. A cold realization settled deep into my chest. If I stayed here through the night, the tree wouldn't cast my shadow. It would keep it. And whatever walked away in the morning would not be fully me. The darkness at the forest's edge shifted again, thicker now, as if something inside it was learning my shape, memorizing my form from the void I left behind. I stepped backward slowly, carefully. My shadow snapped back into place instantly, stretching across the ground like a tether. Relief hit me so sharply, my knees nearly gave out. I didn't look at the tree again. I turned and left the clearing quickly, my heart pounding, feeling the weight of my shadow follow me, heavy and comforting. Behind me, the light around the tree remained natural, patient, waiting for the next thing, willing to stand without its darkness. I never returned to that clearing, but sometimes, at sunset, when the shadows are long and dark, I check my feet. I watch that dark shape stretch out from my heels, just to be sure it's still there. Because some things don't cast shadows, because they are still deciding what to take. The path was narrow, so narrow that the trees on either side nearly touched, their branches interlocking above like clasped fingers. It was an old forest trail, rarely used, marked only by the soft depression of countless footsteps pressed into the earth over many years. I hesitated before entering. There was nothing visibly wrong. No warning signs, No broken branches, no unnatural silence. Birds still called in the distance, and the wind moved gently through the canopy. Yet something about the space between the trees felt deliberate, like a doorway. I stepped forward. The moment I crossed between the first pair of trunks, I felt a subtle shift in the air. Not cold, not pressure, just the sense that something had noticed. I continued walking. The trees stood in pairs now, ebally spaced, each set forming a narrow gate. Their bark was smooth where the path passed closest, worn down by time or touch. As I passed between the second pair, a faint sensation brushed my spine, like a finger tracing a number I couldn't see. I stopped and turned. Nothing moved. The forest looked ordinary. To o ordinari. I laughed quietly at myself and continued. With each pair of trees, the feeling returned. A gentle pressure. Always brief. Always precise. Like being counted, not measured for height or weight, but acknowledge. 1, 2, 3. I didn't hear the numbers. I felt them. Each step forward seemed to settle something unseen, as if a tally was being quietly updated somewhere deep within the forest. I tested it. I stepped backward through one pair of trees. The sensation reversed sharp this time. Not painful, but firm. Displeased. The air tightened, and the pressure lingered longer than before. I stepped forward again, and it eased. The message was subtle but clear. Forward was acceptable. Backward was not. The path curved slightly, and the pairs of trees grew closer together. Their branches overhead thickened, blocking more light. Shadows deepened, though it was still early evening. I noticed markings carved faintly into the bark, small vertical lines, unevenly spaced. Tallies. Some trees had only a few. Others were crowded with them, layered over one another. Some old and weathered, others fresh and sharp. I slowed my pace. The pressure returned, stronger now. As I passed between another pair, it lingered, as if the trees were double-checking their count. I felt suddenly exposed, like a name being spoken aloud in a place that preferred silence. I whispered, without meaning to, "How many?" The forest did not answer, but as I stepped forward again, the sensation sharpened, precise and deliberate. The counting continued. I realized then, the trees did not care who you were. They cared that you were counted, and somewhere ahead, the path narrowed further. The pairs of trees standing closer than before, as if approaching the end of a sequence, or the beginning of a decision. The further I walked, the more I felt like a single bead being pushed along a string. The path was no longer just a trail. It was a mechanism, and I was part of its function. The air grew still, the distant birdsong fading completely. Now, the only sound was the soft crunch of my own footsteps on the earth. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the ground itself was resisting my progress, even as the trees urged me onward. The carvings on the trees became more intricate. They weren't just simple lines anymore. Some looked like symbols, ancient and unfamiliar. Circles with lines through them. Spirals that seemed to draw my eyes inward. Shapes that had no name. I ran my fingers over one. A deep, fresh groove in the bark. It felt strangely warm to the touch. The sensation of being counted intensified with each gate. It was no longer a gentle brush, but a solid, pressing weight against my back. It felt possessive, territorial. The trees were not just noting my presence, they were claiming it. I felt a growing sense of dread. What was this count for? What happened when it reached a certain number? My mind raced with possibilities, each one darker than the last. Was I walking toward a trap? A sacrifice? Or something else entirely? I thought about turning back. Truly turning back this time. Consequences be damned. But when I glanced over my shoulder, the path behind me seemed to have vanished. The trees I had passed through moments before now stood in a dense, impenetrable wall of wood and leaves. There was no opening, no way back. The feeling of displeasure from my earlier attempt to step backward was nothing compared to the absolute certainty I felt now. Retreat was impossible. The path only went one way. Forward, panic began to bubble in my chest. hot and sharp. I forced it down. Panic was useless here. I needed to think. I looked ahead. The path continued its gentle curve, disappearing into even deeper shadow. The pairs of trees were now so close together that their branches were a solid, woven roof above me. It felt like walking through a tunnel carved from living wood. The light was failing fast, the gloom of the forest floor turning into true twilight. The pressure from the trees grew insistent, almost impatient. It was as if I was taking too long, as if I was disrupting the rhythm of the count. I started walking again, faster this time. My heart hammered against my ribs. Each gate I passed through now delivered a jolt, a silent, psychic shock that made me flinch. The numbers, I could almost hear them in my head. 17, 18, 19. They were getting louder, clearer. I passed another pair of trees, their bark almost entirely covered in tally marks, overlapping each other in a chaotic scramble. This pair felt different. The pressure was immense, and it lingered, a heavy hand on my shoulder. I stumbled, catching myself on one of the trunks. My hand landed right on a fresh carving. It wasn't a line, it was a shape, a crude drawing of a human figure, arms outstretched. A shiver ran down my entire body. I pulled my hand back as if burned. The tally marks weren't just counting passersby, they were records. Each one represented a person who had walked this path before me. And now, I was being added to that count. The path ahead opened slightly into a small, circular clearing. In the center stood a single, massive tree, far older and larger than any of the others. Its branches spread out like a dark crown against the sliver of sky visible above. The path led directly to it, and at the base of this ancient tree, something was waiting. It wasn't a person or an animal. It was an absence, a space, a perfectly round, dark opening in the trunk of the great tree. Like a doorway into utter blackness, the path ended here. The pairs of trees stopped. This was the destination. This was what the counting had been leading to. I stood at the edge of the clearing, frozen. The final count had been taken. The pressure on my back released, replaced by a new sensation, an inexorable pull, drawing me toward the opening in the tree. It was not a physical force, but a deep, resonant hum that vibrated in my very bones. A silent command. I knew, with a certainty that defied all logic, that I had a choice to make. I could step into that darkness, completing the sequence the forest had started. Or I could refuse. But as I remembered the path disappearing behind me, I realized the truth. There was no refusal. The path had never offered a choice. It only offered a destination. The counting was simply the process of getting you there. The forest did not care who you were. It only cared that you were counted. And the final count was always one. My feet began to move, not of my own will, but guided by the ancient, silent pull. 1 step. 2 steps. I was crossing the clearing, moving toward the darkness that waited. The tally marks on the trees weren't just a record. They were a promise that everyone who walked this path would reach the end. And now, it was my turn. The opening loomed before me. It did not radiate cold or warmth. It was simply nothing. An end. I took the final step, and the forest fell completely silent, its count finally complete. I continued forward, no longer pretending the sensation was in my imagination. Each step carried weight, now not a physical weight, but a procedural one. It was as though the act of moving between the trees was part of a process already in motion, one that didn't need my understanding to continue. The pairs of trunks stood closer and closer together, their bark nearly brushing against my shoulders as I passed. The pressure returned with each cross in it was gentle, but exact, like a finger pressing a mark into an invisible stone. 4, 5, 6. The numbers formed silently in my mind. They weren't heard, they weren't seen, they were just known. My body reacted before any conscious thought could intervene. My breathing slowed down. My steps evened out into a steady, Maya's rude posse. Something deep inside me recognized this rhythm and simply obeyed it. I tried to disrupt it, to break the pattern, between two pairs of trees. I took a step sideways instead of straight through. The response was immediate. The air thickened sharply, and the sensation became a constricting grip around my chest. It wasn't painful, but it was corrective. A clear message. I stepped forward again, back on the path. The grip released instantly. The forest didn't punish curiosity. It corrected deviation. As I walked, I noticed the tallies carved into the bark of the trees grew denser. Some trees were scarred with hundreds of marks, overlapping, crossing each other, some even scratched out violently. I saw that certain trees had numbers carved lower, near their roots, while others had them higher up, reaching toward the branches. Different heights, different counts, maybe different endings. The light around me dimmed further, even though the sky above should still have held some color. Shadows gathered thickly beneath the trees, pooling around their bases, as if they were waiting for something to be completed. Then, I felt the counting slowed down. The pressure lingered longer between pairs now, as if the forest was considering me, evaluating me. I realized with a tightening in my chest that the counting wasn't infinite. It was approaching a number that mattered, a final number, 7-8. I stopped just before the next pair of trees. The pressure surged instantly, stronger than it had been before. The air tightened around my limbs, urging me forward without any physical force. I understood then. Stopping was allowed only between the counts, not during one. I took a deep breath and stepped through. 9. The forest exhaled, and just like that, the path widened abruptly, opening into a small, quiet clearing. The pressure vanished completely. The counting stopped. The trees around me stood alone again, no longer paired up like gates. The strange sensation that had followed me since that very first step was gone, leaving behind a hollow quiet that felt almost disappointe. I turned around, looking back the way I came. But Bainin made a path no longer existed. The trees stood randomly spaced, ordinary and still, their bark completely unmarked. The tallies were gone. No pairs, no gates. Only the clearing remained, silent and empty. I stood there for a long, long time, unsure whether I should move. Eventually, I walked forward away from where the path had been. Nothing followed, nothing counted. Primera será. Esilon. But sometimes, even now, when I pass between two closely spaced trees anywhere else in the world, I feel it again just for a fleeting moment. A pause. A pressure, as if something, somewhere, is checking its numbers. The fog arrived, without any warning. One moment, the forest road ahead of me was perfectly clear-eyed. Could see the damp earth, the low grass, and all the familiar trees lining both sides. But then, the next moment, it was like a pale gray veil slid silently between the tree trunks, getting thicker and thicker with every breath I took. Everything went quiet, sound just softened, and the world seemed to shrink down to just a few careful steps in any direction. I slowed down almost instinctively. You know how it is. Fog changes things. It makes you impatient. It messes with your confidence. I thought I knew this forest like the back of my hand, at least in clear weather. But fog just rewrites the map. All the familiar landmarks dissolve into nothing, and your sense of direction becomes more of a guess than a certainty. And that's when I saw it. The path, it wasn't where it should have been. Not at all. Just beyond the edge of what I could see, a narrow trail, cut cleanly through the undergrowth. The earth was pressed down, completely untouched by leaves or moss. It was way too precise to be an accident, some random animal trail, and I was absolutely certain it hadn't been there just moments before. My curiosity got the better of me. It pulled me forward, stronger than any sense of caution. I took a step closer, and immediately, the fog thickened right behind me, like it was sealing a door shut. The familiar road I had been on just disappeared, vanished. The only thing left was this new path, winding forward into the pale, unknown gray. The ground under my hiking boots felt firm, solid, well-traveled. This path had definitely been used, maybe recently, or maybe just very, very often. But here's the weird part. There were no footprints. Not a single one. No sign of anyone passing through, except for the fact that the path was clear of any overgrowth. It was just there. I stopped for a second, trying to make sense of it, and the fog responded. It drifted even closer, tightening the space around me, blurring the trees into these vague, watchful shapes. Standing still felt wrong, like I was interrupting something that was supposed to be in motion. So, I took a step forward. Just like that, the fog eased up a little bit. A quiet understanding started to settle in my mind. Movement was encouraged. Standing still was not. The path curved gently, always staying just within my sight. Whenever I tried to look too far ahead, the fog would thicken again, erasing the distance. I could only ever see the next few steps. Never more. It was like the world was being revealed to me one small piece at a time. I decided to test the boundary. I stepped off the path. Instantly, this biting cold air wrapped around my ankle. The ground beneath my foot softened, turning almost liquid, and it pulled me down gently. It wasn't enough to trap me, but it was definitely a warning. I quickly stepped back onto the path, and the sensation vanished completely. The message was crystal clear. The fog wasn't hiding the path. It was protecting it. It was guarding it. This path was special, and the fog was its keeper. As I walked, I started noticing faint shapes at the very edge of my vision. Trees that were spaced a little too evenly. Shadows that lingered a little longer than they should. I couldn't be sure if it was my mind playing tricks on me or something else entirely. Once, I could have sworn I saw a figure standing just beyond the fog's edge, completely motionless. But when I turned my head to look directly at it, there was nothing but more fog and more vague, shadowy trees. It was unnerving, to say the least. I couldn't help myself. I whispered, so quietly it was barely audible. Where does this go? Of course, the fog didn't answer, but the path continued on, steady and patient, guiding me deeper and deeper into a forest that was starting to feel less like a place and more like a process, like some kind of journey I was meant to take. That's when I realized it. This path didn't just exist in asterisk the fog. It existed asterisk because asterisk of it. The fog was the key. It was the reason the path was here at all, and a cold thought trickled down my spine when the fog lifted. So would my way back. I kept walking, my heart a steady drum against my ribs. Each step felt deliberate, guided. The air was cool and smelled of wet earth and something else. Something I couldn't quite place, something ancient and clean. The silence was profound, broken only by the soft crunch of my boots on the dirt. It wasn't a scary silence, though. It was a watchful one, a peaceful one. Almost I started to think about where this path might lead. Was it a shortcut? A trap? Or was it an invitation to somewhere else entirely? A place not on any map. The more I walked, the less the normal rules of the world seemed to apply. Time itself felt strange, stretched out and thin. I had no idea if I'd been walking for minutes or for hours. My watch had stopped. The digital display was just blank. The path began to change, slightly. Tiny, faintly glowing stones started appearing along its edges, like a trail of breadcrumbs left by some otherworldly being. They gave off a soft, ethereal light, not bright enough to illuminate much, but enough to make the path ahead feel a little less daunting, a little more magical. They pulsed with a gentle rhythm, almost like a slow heartbeat, and I found myself matching my pace to their glow. I felt a strange sense of peace settling over me. The initial fear was gone, replaced by an overwhelming sense of wonder. I was on an adventure that no one else had ever taken. I was seeing something that was meant only for me, in T's moment. The forest, the fog, the path it. All felt like a secret whispered just to me. But then, I heard something. A sound that cut through the silence. It was faint at first, like the chime of a tiny bell carried on the wind. I stopped, listening intently. The sound came again, clearer this time. It was music. A simple, haunting melody, played on what sounded like a flute. It was beautiful, but also deeply melancholic. The music seemed to be coming from up ahead, from somewhere deep within the fog. It was a beacon, a call. and without even thinking about it, I found myself walking faster, drawn toward the sound. The glowing stones along the path seemed to pulse a little brighter, a little faster, as if in response to the music. Who was playing? And why? The questions tumbled through my mind, but they didn't matter as much as the pull of the melody. It spoke of old things, of forgotten stories, of a world hidden behind the veil of our own. I knew, with a certainty that settled deep in my bones, that following this music was the whole point of the path. The path began to ascend, winding its way up a gentle slope I hadn't even noticed. The fog thinned slightly as I climbed higher, and I could see the silhouettes of enormous, ancient-looking trees, far larger than any I had seen in the normal forest. Their branches were gnarled and twisted, reaching out like skeletal fingers into the gray sky. And then I saw the source of the music. Ahead of me, sitting on a large, moss-covered stone, was a figure. They were cloaked and hooded, their face hidden in shadow, but I could see the long, slender flute they held to their lips. They didn't seem to notice me as I approached, completely lost in their song. I stopped a respectful distance away, not wanting to break the spell. The music washed over me, and it felt like I was listening to the story of the forest itself. A story of magic, of secrets, and of paths that only appear when you're lost. The figure lowered the flute, and the music faded into the silence. The world held its breath. Slowly, they turned their head towards me. I still couldn't see their face, but I felt their gaze. It wasn't threatening. It was ancient and wise, and a little bit sad. "You found the way," a voice said. It was neither male nor female, but it resonated with the same timeless quality as the music. Not many do. I didn't know what to say. I just stood there, a visitor in a world I didn't understand. The journey here was one I could never explain, and I had a feeling the journey ahead would be even stranger. This wasn't just a path in the fog. It was a doorway, and I had just stepped through. What happens next? I guess we'll have to find out. If you want to hear the next chapter of this story, make sure you're subscribed and hit that notification bell so you don't miss it. I continued walking, guided by the narrow certainty of the path beneath my feet. The fog thickened and thinned in slow pulses, like a living thing breathing around me. Each step forward felt approved. Each hesitation felt noticed. The forest on either side no longer felt like trees and earth. It was suggestion. Shape without detail. Presence without form. I could sense depth where I could not see it. A quiet awareness pressing in from all directions. The path curved again. Gently, patiently. It never rushed me. It never stopped me. It simply waited for my next step. I tried to count how long I had been walking. Seconds slipped away too easily. Minutes lost their edges. Time, like distance, belonged to the fog now. Ahead, the path narrowed. The earth dipped slightly, and the air grew colder. I noticed something strange. The fog behind me felt thicker than the fog ahead. Looking back, I could see almost nothing. Looking forward, the path remained clear, only just. The way back was being erased. I slowed. The fog tightened instantly, pressing closer to my shoulders, blurring even the ground at my feet. A sense of urgency settled over me, not panic, but insistence. Move. I obeyed. As I walked, I began to hear something faint. Not sound exactly, more like pressure, a low sensation in my ears, as if the fog itself carried a muted whisper. Not words, not voices. Possibility? I realized then that the fog was not guiding everyone the same way. It was sorting. Each step I took seemed to narrow my options, filtering paths I would never see, choices I would never know existed. Somewhere nearby, other paths might have been forming just beyond perception meant for others, who entered under different conditions, with different intentions. The path I walked was mine. I reached a small rise. At its crest, the fog thinned just enough for me to see a clearing ahead. Not wide. Not open. Just enough space to stand without trees brushing close. At the center stood a single wooden marker, old and weathered, half sunk into the ground. No writing. No symbols. Just a post placed, deliberate. I stepped into the clearing. The fog paused at the edge, refusing to cross. It lingered there, thick and unmoving, as though waiting for something to conclude. The air felt lighter here, less insistent. I turned slowly, scanning the space. The path behind me was gone. The path ahead did not exist. Only the clearing remained. I understood then. The path had not been leading me through the forest. It had been leading me out of the fog's decision. This was where the process ended. After a moment, the fog began to thin. Gradually, gently, trees regained their edge. Distance returned. Sound followed wind through leaves. A distant bird call. When the fog finally lifted completely, I stood alone in an ordinary part of the forest. No path, no marker, no sign I had ever been guided. I found my way home. But now, whenever fog rolls in suddenly thick and quiet, I stop walking. I wait. Because I know, if a path appears, it means something has already begun choosing. And not every choice leads back. I thought that was the end of it. An unsettling memory. A story to keep to myself. But the forest remembers. And so does the fog. Weeks turned into months. The seasons changed. Autumn's crisp air gave way to the deep cold of winter. I avoided the woods, taking longer routes, sticking to well-lit streets, even during the day. But you can't outrun a memory that's tied to the weather itself. One evening, a thick, wet fog rolled in from the coast, blanketing the town in silence. It wasn't the same as the forest fog. It carried the scent of salt and city grime, but the sight of it, the way it swallowed streetlights and muffled the world, sent a tremor of unease through me. I was driving home from work, my knuckles white on the steering wheel. The world outside my car was a swirling gray void. My usual route was blocked. An accident, the flashing lights suggested. I was forced to detour down a side street I rarely used, one that ran along the edge of the town's old, neglected park. The park was more of a managed woodland, a place people avoided after dark. As I drove, my headlights cut a weak tunnel through the oppressive mist. And then I saw it. At the edge of the road, where the asphalt met the grass of the park, a narrow dirt path appeared. It wasn't there before. I knew this road. It materialized out of the fog, clear and distinct, leading away from the street and into the dark trees. It looked exactly like the one from the forest. My heart hammered against my ribs. It wasn't just in the deep woods anymore. It was here. It was looking for me. I pressed my foot on the accelerator, tires squealing on the wet pavement. I didn't look back. I sped through the unfamiliar streets, my mind racing. Was this a test? A summons? The fog wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was a medium, a stage. And it seemed the play wasn't over. Primera madre, Omi locked the doors and drew all the curtains. But the silence in my house felt different. It felt heavy, expectant. The same pressure I'd felt in my ears in the forest was back. A low hum just at the edge of hearing. The fog was outside, pressed against my windows, but it felt like it was inside, too. 4 days, I was on edge. Every wisp of morning mist, every steamy shower made me flinch. I started reading, digging into local folklore, anything I could find about strange fogs or disappearances in the area. Most of it was old wives' tales, ghost stories told to scare children. But then I found a small, self-published book in a dusty corner of the local library. It was a collection of regional oddities, written by an amateur historian decades ago. One chapter was titled The Sifting Mist. It described a recurring phenomenon, a sentient fog that would occasionally descend upon the region's forests and, sometimes, its older towns. The author wrote that the fog didn't just obscure things. It sorted them. It presented paths to those it selected. Paths that led elsewhere. The book was vague on the destination. Some legends called it a gateway to a hidden world, others a trap from which there was no return. The author claimed the paths were tailored to the individual. A path might appear to someone consumed by grief, leading them to a place of perpetual memory, or to someone ambitious, leading them to a challenge they could never conquer. My path. What was it for? The path in the forest had felt like a simple test of obedience. Follow, and you will be released. But now, it felt different. It was no longer a one-time event. It was a recurring invitation. The book mentioned the markers. The simple wooden posts, it kaletem anchors or thresholds. Reaching one meant you had completed a phase of the sorting, but the book warned that completing one trial didn't mean you were free. It meant you had been categorized. You were now known to the fog, and it might call upon you again with a different path, a different purpose. The final line of the chapter chilled me to the bone. To be chosen once is a curiosity. To be chosen twice is a designation. A few nights later, I had a dream. I was back in the clearing, standing before the wooden post. But this time, something was different. The fog wasn't waiting at the edge. It was swirling around my feet, slowly rising. And the post. It wasn't just a marker anymore. It began to change. The wood twisting and darkening. It formed a shape. A door. Not a large door, just a low, narrow opening in the fabric of reality, humming with that same low-frequency pressure. The path that had vanished was there again. But this time it led from my feet directly to the threshold of that impossible door. There was no choice to turn back. The clearing was no longer a release. It was the final destination. I woke up in a cold sweat, the low hum still echoing in my ears. I knew then that I couldn't just wait anymore. I couldn't just stop walking when the fog rolled in. It was coming for me whether I walked or not. The path wasn't an option I could refuse. It was a future that was being built for me, one step at a time, whether I took those steps in the real world or in my own mind. The next time a real fog came, dense and silent, I didn't hide. I put on my coat and walked outside. The air was cold and still. The world was gone, replaced by a soft, gray infinity. I stood on the sidewalk in front of my house and waited. My heart was calm. The fear was still there, but it was joined by a strange, resolute curiosity. I didn't have to wait long. There, on my own front lawn, etching itself into existence on the damp grass, a path began to form. It was narrow and clear, and it led away from my home, down the street, and toward the beckoning, silent gray. I took a deep breath. The path I walked before was a trial, a sorting. It led me out. But this one felt different. This one felt like it was leading me in. I had been designated. I looked at the path, a clear line in a world of uncertainty. I didn't know where it led. I didn't know what the fog had decided for me. But I knew I had to walk it, because the alternative wasn't living. It was just waiting. And I was done waiting. With my first step, the fog seemed to sigh around me, a whisper of approval. The path ahead was patient. It was waiting, and this time I had a feeling it wasn't going to disappear. Not every choice leads back, I had told myself. And some paths, once you're on them, are the only way forward. The cave entrance was smaller than I expected. Not narrow, just modest, as if it had no interest in announcing itself. A dark ovale carved into pale stone, half hidden by hanging roots and damp moss. If I hadn't been looking directly at it, I would have walked past without noticing. Sound changed the moment I stepped inside. The forest noises behind me faded too quickly, swallowed by stone. My footsteps echoed softly, then settled into a deeper silence, one that felt layered like quiet, stacked on top of older quiet. I stopped a few steps in. "Hello," my voice returned to me, altered, not louder, not distorted, just delayed, as if the cave had taken a moment to consider it before giving it back. I waited. Nothing else followed. No drip of water, no distant rumble, just the sound of my own breathing, careful and slow. I continued forward. The tunnel sloped gently downward, the walls smooth in places, jagged in others. My light caught shallow grooves along the stone, natural erosion, I assumed, but they seemed too evenly spaced. Too intentional. I ran my fingers over them. They were cool to the touch, and smoother than the surrounding rock, as if worn down by time or something else. It was unnerving, The idea that these marks weren't just random patterns of nature, they felt like a language I couldn't read, a warning or a signpost left in the dark. I spoke again, louder this time. "Is anyone here?" The echo returned, softer now, shorter. As though the cave had grown closer while I wasn't watching, a chill traced its way down my spine, independent of the cave's cool air. It was a strange sensation, the feeling of being observed in a place that should be completely empty. My senses were on high alert, every subtle shift in the air, every faint sound amplifying in my mind. The darkness ahead seemed to thicken, a solid wall of black that my flashlight beam struggled to pierce. Then, without thinking, I said my name. The sound didn't echo the way it should have. It came back, almost right. Same rhythm, same tone, but the timing was wrong. Too precise. The pause before it returned felt measured, intentional, like someone waiting for their turn to speak. I frowned and tried again, quieter. My name came back clearer this time. Closer. I turned slowly, shining my light behind me. The tunnel was empty. The entrance was still visible, a dim gray oval far away. I told myself it was acoustics. Caves do strange things with sound. Everyone knows that. Still, I stopped talking. The silence stretched. My heart was thumping a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I could hear the blood rushing in my ears, a low hum that filled the void left by the echoes. I tried to rationalize it. Sound waves bouncing off complex surfaces, creating delays, filtering certain frequencies. It was science. It had to be, but the feeling was primal. It was the ancient fear of the dark, of the unknown that lurks just beyond the firelight. Then very faintly I heard it again. My name, not echoed, not reflected. Spoken. It came from deeper within the cave, soft and careful, as if whoever or whatever had said it was practicing the sound. I didn't answer. The cave waited. My breath hitched in my throat. Every rational explanation evaporated, leaving behind a cold, hard knot of fear. This wasn't an echo. An echo is a dead thing, a remnant of a sound that has already passed. This was alive. It was inquisitive. It was learning. I stood frozen, my light fixed on the impenetrable darkness ahead. The source of the voice was somewhere in there, hidden from sight, watching me, listening to me. I forced myself to take a step back, then another. My movements were slow, deliberate, as if trying not to startle a predator. The gray oval of the entrance seemed a lifetime away. With each step I took, the silence felt more oppressive, more expectant. It was waiting for me to speak again, to give it another piece of myself. The air grew colder. Or maybe that was just the fear seeping into my bones. The smooth, grooved patterns on the wall now seemed less like erosion and more like tallies. Records of visitors who had come before me. Had they heard their names, whispered back at them, too? The urge to run was overwhelming, a screaming instinct to flee back into the light, back to the familiar sounds of the forest. But another part of me was routed to the spot, held captive by a terrifying curiosity. What was in this cave? What kind of thing learns to speak by stealing your voice? The faint, whispered sound of my own name hung in the air. A phantom presence that was both me and not me. It felt like a violation, like a piece of my identity had been carefully plucked away and was now being examined by something ancient and unseen. I knew I should leave. I knew that walking deeper into this place was a mistake I might not be able to undo. But the whisper had been a question, a hook cast into the dark, and I felt an inexplicable pull to know the answer. Against all better judgment, I held my ground. I didn't speak. I just listened, waiting for the cave to make its next move. The silence stretched on, a tense, drawn-out moment where the world seemed to hold its breath. And I waited with it, a lone figure in the dark, caught between terror and a terrible, magnetic fascination. The quiet was finally broken, not by my name this time, but by a soft scraping sound from deep within the tunnel. It was a dry, dragging noise, like stone being pulled across stone. It was slow, rhythmic, and getting closer. My blood ran cold. The thing in the dark wasn't just listening anymore. It was moving. It was coming for me. I had to make a choice. Run back to the safety of the daylight, or stay and face the impossible thing that was learning to speak my name. The scraping grew louder, echoing in the confined space, each sound a step closer to my position. The cave had my voice, and now, it seemed, it wanted more. What happens next? Find out in Chapter 2. I stood perfectly still, listening. The cave did not repeat my name again right away. Instead, it seemed to settle, as if the stone itself was adjusting, shifting its attention toward me. The air grew thick, the silence heavier, more deliberate, like a held breath, waiting to be released. I took a careful step forward, my boots scraping lightly against the rock floor. The sound traveled down the winding tunnel, and just disappeared. It did not return. No echo. No response. The natural laws of sound seemed to break in this place. I swallowed, the knot in my throat tightening, and I spoke softly, choosing my words with immense care. "Who's there?" The cave answered immediately. My name. It was clearer than before, and it felt closer. The voice wasn't loud, but it was certain, confident in the shape of the sound it was forming. It didn't feel like it was mocking me. It wasn't threatening. It was testing. A cold dread crept up my spine, and I backed away a step, my eyes fixed on the darkness ahead. The light from the cave entrance flickered slightly, becoming dimmer than it had been just moments ago. The tunnel seemed to stretch, the curve of the stone walls elongating, pulling the darkness deeper into the earth. I realized then that the voice wasn't following me in the traditional sense. The distance itself was changing, the space between us contracting and expanding on its own terms. I stopped retreating, planting my feet firmly. Another pause filled the void, a silence so profound it felt like a presence in itself. Then my name came again, but this time it held a question, not in the word itself, but in the timing, the intonation. A subtle rise at the end, as if it was asking for my confirmation, seeking my permission. I shook my head, a useless gesture in the gloom, but an instinct I couldn't suppress. "No," I whispered, my voice barely a breath. The cave fell silent. For a moment, a sliver of hope cut through the fear. I thought that had been enough, that by refusing to answer, I had broken whatever strange pattern I had stumbled into. Encouraged, I took another step backward, shuffling toward the safety of the entrance, and then it came again. My name. But it was wrong. Almost right, but not quite. It was stretched, slightly mispronounced, like a mouth learning how to move for the first time, shaping unfamiliar sounds. The noise scraped against the stone, raw and unfinished. The light behind me dimmed further, the world outside pulling away. And in that chilling moment, I understood. The cave wasn't calling asterisk to asterisk me. It was calling asterisk for asterisk me. Each time it spoke my name, it was refining its pronunciation, bringing it closer to something it could use, something that could replace me, if needed. A primal fear seized me, and I clamped my mouth shut. I would not speak again. I refused to give it any more of myself, even as the cave tested variations of my name soft. Slow, careful, each attempt was closer than the last, a terrifying progression toward perfection. Finally, it stopped. The silence returned, but it was different now. It was expectant. It felt like it was waiting for one final piece to complete its puzzle. I took one last, desperate step toward the entrance. Instantly, the light brightened, flooding back into the cave mouth, welcoming, almost relieved. And then, from deep behind me, I heard my name one final time. It was perfectly spoken, an exact replica of my own voice, clear and resonant. I didn't turn around. I didn't dare. I scrambled out of the cave without another word, bursting back into the living world. Outside, the forest welcomed me with an explosion of sound and movement, the rustle of wind in the leaves, the chirping of insects, the vibrant pulse of life. I breathed it all in deeply, trying to ground myself in reality, to wash away the unnatural stillness of that place. But it never truly left me. Sometimes, even now, when I'm alone and the room is quiet, I hear it. My name, spoken softly, with perfect, chilling accuracy. Waiting, patiently, for me to answer. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think the cave wanted? The cave entrance yawned in complete silence. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no distant drip of water, only a perfect, unnerving stillness. Its opening was wide, a black hollow carved into pale stone that seemed to swallow light rather than reflect it. I approached cautiously, my heart thumping a rhythm that the air refused to carry. The ground was uneven, littered with small, sharp stones, but felt firm under my boots, a deceptive solidity. The deeper shadows at the entrance seemed to lean outward, a tangible presence pulling my attention toward the darkness, daring me to step inside. It was a dare I couldn't ignore. I paused at the threshold, adjusting the grip on my hyperate flashlight. I clicked it on. Its beam, which could normally pierce a forest at night, penetrated only a few feet before dissolving into an absolute ink-like black. The light didn't fade. It was consumed. I whispered, a small test against the oppressive emptiness. Hello. Nothing returned. Not a single echo, not even the faintest hint of a vibration. The cave was utterly soundless, as though it had absorbed the very act of speaking, erasing the sound waves from existence. My voice was gone the moment it left my lips. Gathering my courage, I took the first step inside. The air immediately changed. It was heavier than outside, cool and thick, like stepping into a deep, forgotten cellar. It filled my lungs with a strange, ancient cold. My footfalls made no sound. Not a tap, not a scuff, not the slightest crunch of gravel. The stones beneath me remained completely mute. Even the sound of my own breathing felt subdued, as if the cave had taken it in, folded it into the black, and filed it away. I moved forward slowly, every sense on high alert. The walls narrowed at first, their surfaces rough and jagged, brushing against my jacket without a whisper of fabric. Then, just as claustrophobia began to set in, they opened into a vast chamber. I tried to measure its size, sweeping my flashlight in a wide arc. It was impossible. The ceiling vanished into an impenetrable darkness above. The walls seemed to stretch endlessly to my left and right, their true distance unknowable. My flashlight beam was a lonely, pathetic spear of light in an ocean of void. It didn't illuminate a far wall. It just ended, abruptly cut off by the sheer, light-devouring nature of the space. It felt like standing on the edge of the universe, looking out into nothing. Every step I took echoed with nothing. Every breath I took vanished into nothing. The silence was no longer just an absence of sound. It felt like a presence, a heavy blanket smothering the world. I tried calling out again, this time with more force, projecting my voice as loud as I could. Anyone here? The sound didn't vanish this time. It simply ceased to exist the instant it was formed. It was as if I hadn't spoken at all, just mouthed the words into a vacuum. The sheer physical impossibility of it sent a shiver down my spine. Sound doesn't just disappear. It reflects, it decays, it travels. Here, it was nullified, driven by a desperate need for some kind of feedback, some confirmation of the physical world. I crouched down and picked up a small stone. It felt real enough in my hand, solid and cool. I tossed it a few feet in front of me. No noise, no clatter, no echo, no hint of impact. It was like watching a movie on mute. The stone left my hand, arced through the air, and then it was just gone, swallowed by the silent floor. It was in that moment of profound sensory deprivation that a horrifying realization dawned on me. This cave had no floor, or at least no bottom I could detect. The stones underfoot, the very ground I was standing on, were suspended over nothing. They were like solid fragments of a shattered world, floating in an absolute black, held in place by some unseen, unknown force. My breath hitched. I shone my flashlight straight down. Between my feet, the beam shot downwards and disappeared instantly. There was no reflection, no glint of rock or dust below. The darkness was infinite, bottomless, and somehow patient. It wasn't just an absence of light. It was a thing in itself. A substance of pure void. I tried to take another step forward, but my body hesitated. My boots pressed firmly against the ground, yet the sense of the immense distance beneath me collapsed my confidence. There was nothing to measure, nothing to anchor my senses to. Gravity itself felt uncertain, a suggestion rather than a law. And yet, I did not fall. I was suspended, as though the cave itself decided my position, holding me in place for its own inscrutable purpose. And then I felt it. Not heard it, but felt it. A faint vibration at the very edge of my perception. It wasn't a sound. It wasn't movement. It was just a presence, a low, resonant thrum that seemed to emanate from the abyss below, traveling through the soles of my boots and up into my bones. Something massive, ancient, and patient, waiting in the blackness beneath me. It was silent, but it was profoundly aware. The silence suddenly shifted. It was no longer passive. The absence of sound became heavier, almost physical, pressing down on my chest like a great weight. It was the pressure of being observed. The blackness itself was aware that I had noticed it. A cold dread, colder than the air in the cave, began to bloom in my stomach. I understood then that this cave, this place, did not exist for me. I existed within it. My presence was a temporary intrusion into its eternal, silent reality. The ground beneath me wasn't a floor. It was a perch. The silence wasn't emptiness. It was a state of being, and the darkness wasn't just a lack of light. It was alive. With trembling legs, I took a cautious step backward, desperate to retreat to the known world. My boots made no noise. My shaky breath vanished into the airless void. As I moved back, the vibration receded slightly. It wasn't frightened. It wasn't startled. It felt patient, calculating. It was letting me go, but I knew it was watching. As I slowly backed away, the immense weight of understanding settled upon me. The cave had always been here, waiting for anyone brave or foolish enough to step inside its silent, gaping maw. It was a trap for the curious, and once you were inside, once you had felt its presence and understood its nature, you were counted. You became a part of its silent, endless darkness, a memory held within the void. Reaching the entrance felt like breaking the surface after being held underwater for too long. The first breath of outside air was a shock, filled with the alien sounds of wind and my own frantic heartbeat. I turned and looked back one last time. The entrance was just as it was before, a black, silent hollow in the pale stone. But now I knew what it held. A piece of me was still in there, absorbed into the silence, a tiny echo that would never sound. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to my core, that the cave would continue to wait, patient and bottomless, for the next curious soul. I remained still for a long, long moment, just letting my eyes adjust to the sheer, overwhelming blackness. It was a darkness that seemed to extend infinitely below and all around me, a void that felt less like an absence of light and more like a presence in itself. There was no sound. Nothing. Not the familiar drip, drip, drip of water you'd expect in a cave, not the whisper of wind, not even the frantic thumping of my own heartbeat, which I was sure should be hammering against my ribs. It was as if the cave had simply swallowed everything, erasing sound from existence. I took a step forward, my movements cautious, testing the ground with the toe of my boot. The leather scraped against stone, but there was no noise. No vibration traveled up through the sole, no satisfying crunch of grit. It was as if the very act of moving, the physics of it, had been completely erased. A faint, almost imperceptible draft touched my face, a current of air from an unseen source. The air felt colder here, heavier, carrying a strange density that made each breath feel deliberate. It was then I realized something deeply unsettling. The cave wasn't just empty space. It felt aware. It was as if every step I took, every shaky breath I exhaled, every thought that I allowed to linger in my panicked mind was being registered, noted, and absorbed into the fabric of the place. It was a silent, all-encompassing consciousness. I knelt down, needing a point of contact with something solid, something real. I ran my fingers along the jagged stone at my side. The texture was there, sharp and cold. It was real. Solid. Yet, it felt unmoored from the rules of the world I knew. The floor beneath my boots didn't respond with the expected resistance or sound. The cave seemed to suspend reality itself, leaving me feeling weightless, unanchored. Like an astronaut floating in a dark, terrestrial sea. I had to try something. I whispered my own name, just a quiet murmur, testing the silence, needing to hear a human voice, even my own. Nothing. Nothing came back. Not the faintest echo. Not a hint of a vibration in the air. My voice was absorbed entirely, swallowed by the oppressive quiet, leaving no trace it had ever existed. It was like shouting into a pillow the size of a mountain. I took another step, then another, pushing deeper into the unknown. The darkness beneath my feet felt utterly infinite. My flashlight, a powerful beam that usually cut through any night, seemed pathetic here. It penetrated only a few feet before the light just ended. It didn't reflect or scatter. It was simply consumed, swallowed whole by the void. The walls around me were barely perceptible, existing only as vague, shadowy forms, where the narrow cone of light managed to reach before it too was extinguished. And then I sensed it. It wasn't something I saw or heard. It was a feeling, a deep, primal awareness of another presence. It was undeniable. It felt ancient, patient, and deliberate, and it was intensely aware of my every movement. I could feel the sheer weight of its attention pressing up from the bottomless void below me. A silent observation that was more terrifying than any roar or sudden movement could ever be. A cold dread, sharp and icy, snaked its way up my spine. My instincts screamed at me. A single, primal command. Leave. Now. I tried to obey. I turned, my movements jerky with rising panic, and stepped back toward where I thought the entrance was. But the darkness remained absolute. The world outside didn't reappear. The comforting gray light of the forest wasn't there. The cave had not let me go. Not yet. It was as if a door had been shut behind me. A door made of pure nothingness. A chilling realization began to dawn on me. This wasn't just a physical space. It was a test. It was testing my awareness, my patience, my sanity. Every motion I made was being measured. Every hesitation, every flicker of fear in my mind was being noted. The cave wasn't a prison in the traditional sense. It didn't have bars or locked doors. Its power was more subtle, more psychological. The true realization hit me like a physical blow. A sudden, stark clarity in the midst of my terror. This cave didn't want me to escape. It didn't want me to fight it. It wanted acknowledgement. It wanted to be seen, to be recognized for the conscious, powerful entity that it was. The moment I understood this, the moment I stopped struggling and simply accepted its presence, the immense pressure rising from the void below me lessened. It didn't disappear entirely, but it receded, like a predator that has made its point and is now simply observing with detached curiosity. The void itself remained, a silent, gaping maw of infinite black. With this new understanding, I moved carefully, deliberately, back toward the faint, almost imaginary outline of the entrance. It was less a visible opening and more a subtle shift in the quality of the darkness. With each step I took, the cave seemed to release its hold on me, just a fraction at a time. It was a negotiation, a silent agreement between me and this ancient consciousness. I acknowledged its power, and in return, it was granting me passage. Finally, my boots touched different ground. There was a sound, a soft crunch of leaves and soil, solid ground outside. The forest air, crisp and smelling of pine and damp earth, rushed back into my lungs. Wind moved through the trees above, a gentle, rustling sigh that was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Somewhere in the distance, birds called to each other their simple songs, a symphony of life. I turned and looked back. The cave entrance was unchanged, a jagged mouth in the rock face, dark, silent, and seemingly infinite. I had left, but I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that a part of me had not. Somewhere deep in that suffocating blackness, the cave remembered. It remembered every step, every thought, every fearful breath I had taken. It held a piece of me now, an echo of my presence stored within its silent, ancient memory. And it would wait, patiently, endlessly, for the next person to walk in. The snow crunched sharply under my boots, each step releasing a crisp sound into the frozen night. The forest was quiet. So quiet, it felt deliberate. Every tree, every branch, every frozen leaf seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I had wandered far from the path, drawn by a pull I couldn't explain, a curiosity mixed with the faint glow of moonlight bouncing off the snow. The air was thin and sharp against my cheeks. My breath hung in front of me as white puffs, disappearing immediately into the still, frigid night. That's when I noticed it. A single tree larger than any nearby stood alone in a small clearing. Its trunk seemed to glow, faintly, not with light, but with a palpable warmth. The snow all around its base had melted slightly, forming a small, perfectly dry circle on the forest floor. I found myself moving toward it, almost without thinking, my steps cautious. The warmth was real, radiating through the air, brushing against my hands and face like a gentle caress. I reached out and pressed my palms against the bark. It was warmer than anything should be on a night like this. It wasn't the heat of a fire, it was something gentler, slower, more persistent. It felt as if the tree carried the memory of summer deep within its core. Sunlight folded carefully inside its rings. I started to circle it slowly, my boots sinking into the untouched snow outside the dry ring. As I moved away, the snow beneath my feet hardened again, the cold returning. But the warmth followed me slightly, lingering at the edges of the clearing, subtle and incredibly patient. I knelt down to touch the trunk again, this time closer to the base. My fingers sank slightly into the bark, which was smoother than I expected, almost like worn leather. The warmth traveled up my arms, a slow and comforting sensation that settled in my chest like a steady, low heartbeat. And then, a low whisper of sound followed. It wasn't words, not voices, but the softest, faintest vibration, humming through the wood and into my fingertips. It was a sense of movement, a feeling of being noticed. I glanced around, my heart picking up its pace. But there was no one, only the silent, snow-covered trees. Only the deep, endless quiet of the night. I realized then that the warmth wasn't just heat, it was awareness. The tree knew I was here. It felt like a cautious welcome, an observation. The longer I stayed, the stronger the sensation grew, as though the tree was measuring my presence, weighing my intentions with an ancient, unhurried wisdom. I tried to speak, my voice barely a whisper against the silence. "Are you alive?" Of course, there was no response, not in words. Anyway, yet the warmth deepened, wrapping around my chest, and I felt my own racing heartbeat begin to slow down, matching the calm rhythm emanating from the tree. It was not cold. It was not hostile, but it was undeniably aware. I took a slow step back. The warmth lessened slightly, receding toward the trunk, like a tide pulling away from the shore. The cold air rushed back in to fill the space. I watched as tiny, new snowflakes began to drift down, starting to cover the bare ground around the tree again. I felt both comforted and deeply uneasy. The tree was alive in a way I couldn't define, not moving, not speaking, but present, patient, and deliberate. I stayed there for what felt like hours, just feeling the quiet heat seep into me, the frozen stillness of the forest surrounding us both, a silent communion between a lost wanderer and an ancient, living sentinel. And though I eventually had to leave, had to find my way back home, I could still feel that warmth in my chest as I walked away. It was a powerful reminder that some warmth doesn't come from fire. Some life doesn't need to move to be felt, and some awareness just waits, silently, in the heart of the woods. I returned the next night, and the night after that. The path to the clearing became familiar, a secret pilgrimage I made under the cover of darkness. Each time, the tree was there, a beacon of quiet warmth in the vast, cold forest. The circle of melted snow at its base became a sanctuary, a place where the harshness of winter couldn't touch. I started talking to it. At first, it felt foolish, whispering my thoughts to a piece of wood, but the warmth always seemed to respond, intensifying slightly when I spoke of my day, of my worries, of the small joys I'd found. It felt like listening. The vibrations in the bark became more distinct, a low, resonant hum that seemed to soothe the frayed edges of my mind. One evening, a blizzard hit. The wind howled through the trees, and the snow fell so thick I could barely see a few feet ahead. Common sense told me to stay home, to stay safe, but the pull of the tree was stronger. I bundled up, determined to make my way to the clearing. The journey was treacherous. The wind pushed against me, and the snow was so deep it felt like wading through a frozen river. Moritanonse, I thought about turning back, but the memory of that gentle warmth pushed me forward. When I finally stumbled into the clearing, I was exhausted and shivering, my clothes soaked through. But the tree was there, unwavering. The circle around it was larger than usual, a welcoming expanse of dry, warm ground. The glow from its trunk seemed brighter, more intense against the swirling snow. I collapsed at its base, pressing my back against the warm bark, letting the heat seep into my frozen bones. The wind was a distant roar outside our small haven. Here, it was calm. The warmth enveloped me completely, chasing away the chill that had settled deep within me. I closed my eyes, listening to the tree's steady hum, a counterpoint to the storm's fury. It was more than just physical warmth. It was a feeling of protection, of being sheltered. I felt a profound sense of gratitude, a connection that went beyond simple curiosity. This tree wasn't just a strange phenomenon. It was a guardian. It had waited for me. As the storm raged on, I drifted into a light sleep. Leaning against the ancient trunk, I dreamt of sunlight, of green leaves rustling in a summer breeze, of deep roots stretching into the earth, drinking from hidden springs. I dreamt of seasons passing, of centuries turning, all from the quiet, unmoving perspective of the tree. I felt its immense patience, its deep, slow life. When I woke, the storm had passed. The first light of dawn was filtering through the branches, painting the snow in shades of pink and gold. The forest was transformed, blanketed in a pristine layer of fresh snow, everything silent and still. The air was clean and crisp. The warmth from the tree was still there, a steady, comforting presence at my back. I got to my feet, feeling refreshed and surprisingly energetic. The experience had changed something within me. The world felt different, more alive. I realized the forest wasn't just a collection of trees. It was a community, and I had been welcomed into its most secret circle. I placed my hand on the trunk one last time before leaving. "Thank you," I whispered. The vibration I felt in return was stronger than ever before. A clear, resonant hum that felt like an acknowledgement, a farewell, until next time. Walking back, the world seemed brighter. The crunch of my boots on the snow sounded less like breaking and more like a greeting. I carried the warmth of the tree with me, not just in my memory, but as a tangible feeling in my chest. I knew I would be back. The forest had shared its secret with me, a secret of life and warmth, hidden in the coldest of seasons, and I would forever be its keeper. The forest held its breath, and I held mine. I lingered near the tree, afraid to step too far from the warmth that clung to its ancient trunk. Under my feet, the packed snow began to soften, but I felt no chill. There was only this slow, steady heat, a living thing, pulsing gently through the bark and into the very marrow of my bones. The silence was profound. No wind rustled the branches, no nocturnal creature stirred. Yet, I wasn't alone. I felt a subtle presence all around me, an awareness that went beyond just the tree. It was as if the clearing itself was watching, conscious. Every breath I took felt counted, every shift of my weight measured by an unseen observer, drawn by an irresistible curiosity. I pressed my hands against the trunk again. This time, the warmth seeped deeper, a comforting tide that reached my chest and spread through my arms. It felt like a heartbeat, but one that resonated in stone and bark. In that moment, I felt the history of the tree flood into myth-long, slow passage of countless years. The brutal winters endured, the glorious sunlight absorbed, a life held in an impossible, silent patience. My own voice felt like an intrusion in the stillness, but I had to speak. I whispered, "I won't harm you." The warmth seemed to respond, pulsing gently, a silent acknowledgement of my words. And then, something utterly unexpected happened. The snow around the base of the tree shifted ever so slightly. It receded, forming a small, perfect circle, revealing a patch of earth that felt almost hollow. A faint vibration traveled from the ground, up through the roots, through the trunk, and into my fingertips. It wasn't a sound, not a physical movement, but a presence reaching out, aware of my own awareness. I stepped back instinctively, a gasp catching in my throat. The heat lessened, but didn't vanish entirely. It lingered in the air, patient, waiting. It was a test, I realized. It was testing whether I would return, whether I would stay or flee from this impossible wonder. The night deepened, and the sky transformed. Stars, sharp and brilliant like scattered diamonds, appeared between the dark silhouettes of the trees. Their cold light reflected faintly in the untouched patches of snow. My breath fogged in the frigid air, a stark contrast to the persistent, gentle warmth that radiated from the tree. It was a phenomenon that defied logic, impossible to measure, impossible to understand, but undeniably, profoundly alive. It dawned on me then that this tree, and perhaps others like it, hidden in the deep woods, didn't operate on instinct or emotion, as animals do. They observed. They waited. Their existence was one of silent contemplation. They offered warmth to those who approached with respect, and they offered their infinite patience to those who honored their stillness. The hours melted away, but eventually, I knew I had to leave this sacred space. The world beyond the forest still existed, and I couldn't stay forever. Slowly, carefully, I stepped away from the trunk. The warmth receded with each step, fading back into the tree as if being drawn inward. The snow crept back over the bare circle at its base, silently erasing any trace of my presence, covering the earth as if I had never been there at all. The tree stood exactly as it had before, still, motionless, a silent giant against the starry sky. But now I knew better. It was aware. Its warmth was no longer something I could feel on my skin, but it lingered in my memory, a quiet heartbeat echoing in the frozen night. As I walked back through the forest, retracing my steps in the snow, I felt its observation following me. It wasn't a threatening feeling, not cold or menacing. It was just patient. It felt like a memory that was also alive, waiting for the next visitor, the next lost traveler, to notice its quiet miracle. It taught me something profound on that cold winter night. Some warmth cannot be touched by hand, some life cannot be seen with the eyes, and some awareness simply waits, silent and eternal, in the deep stillness of winter. Have you ever felt a place watching you, not with eyes, but with a presence so old it feels like part of the earth itself? That's what happened to me. It started with a whisper of a rumor, a stretch of forest the locals avoided, a place not marked on any map. They spoke of it in hushed tones, with warnings that were more like pleas. Naturally, I had to see for myself. The entrance was almost invisible, hidden behind a thick curtain of tangled roots and moss-covered stones. It was a discovery made by pure chance, or maybe something was guiding my steps. The moment I pushed through, the world outside vanished. The air inside was cool, damp, and heavy with the scent of wet earth and ancient stone. My flashlight cut a nervous beam through the darkness, making the shadows dance like living things. The tunnel was tight at first, claustrophobic, but it soon opened into a small, almost perfectly circular chamber. And that's when I saw it. Etched into the far wall, so faint it was almost a trick of the light, was a carving. This wasn't just some random scratch on the rock. It was deliberate, intricate. The lines flowed and twisted into shapes that were familiar and alien all at once. They suggested figures, but not human ones. They were angular, yet graceful, forming a language that felt older than words, older than time itself. I moved closer, mesmerized. Some marks were deep and confident, others were shallow, almost hesitant. It looked as if generations had come here, adding their voice to a silent, ongoing conversation. I reached out and touched the stone. It was warmer than the surrounding wall, a strange, residual heat that seemed to hum from within. As my fingers traced one of the elegant curves, I felt a faint vibration, a thrumming that traveled up my arm. A sudden draft swirled around me, but it wasn't wind. It felt alive. A presence moving just at the edge of my senses. My flashlight beam caught the edges of the carving, and for a heart-stopping moment, the shadows seemed to shift and writhe, giving the symbols an impossible depth. A primal fear, cold and sharp, shot through me. I stumbled back, my heart hammering against my ribs. This cave wasn't on the maps for a reason. These carvings, they weren't just art. They were a seal, a warning, or maybe a guardian. I felt eyes on me, an intense, unseen gaze. It wasn't coming from the darkness, but from the wall itself. The stone felt aware, attuned to my intrusion. It was as if the ancient shapes held the memory of every soul who had ever stood where I was standing, every hand that had ever dared to touch them. The silence was absolute, pressing in on me. I had to break it. My voice was a shaky whisper. "Who made this?" The cave answered, not with a sound, but with a feeling. A low, subtle vibration rolled through the stone floor. A tremor so slight, I might have imagined it. In the wavering beam of my light, the carvings seemed to shimmer, to pulse with a faint, internal glow. A strange understanding settled over me. This place wasn't hostile. It wasn't threatening me. It just was. It didn't need me to protect it. It needed me to see it, to acknowledge the countless hands, the forgotten lives, the memory etched into the very bones of the earth. I backed away slowly, my light painting a retreating path on the tunnel walls. The chamber fell back into its deep quiet, but the feeling of that ancient heartbeat lingered under my feet. When I finally pushed my way back through the roots and into the bright, noisy world of the living, everything felt different. I knew the carving would remain, hidden in its silent chamber. It wasn't lost or unmapped anymore. It was just waiting for the next curious soul to stumble upon its secret. A secret I now carry with me. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Last time, we discovered something truly incredible, an unmapped cave filled with carvings that seemed almost alive. Today, we're going back inside. I have to know what's in there. Let's do this. All right, I'm stepping back into the chamber. The air is still, heavy, just like I remember. My flashlight beam hits the far wall, and there they are, carvings. They're glimmering, just faintly, and the shadows they cast seem to stretch and twist in the light. It's like the wall itself is breathing. Each line feels like it's alive, subtly shifting as I watch. It's almost as if the stone remembers me being here. That vibration I felt before. It's back. It's stronger this time, coming up from the floor, through the soles of my boots. It's not just a random tremor. It's rhythmic, deliberate. It feels like a giant heartbeat, buried deep within the rock. My own heart is starting to match its rhythm. This is getting intense. I'm moving closer to the center of the wall, to that main carving. It's the most complex one, a web of lines and symbols that almost seems to pulse with its own inner light. The longer I stare at it, the more I get this uncanny feeling that it's staring back, that the shapes are aware of me, responding to my gaze. This is beyond anything I've ever experienced. My hand is shaking a little, but I have to touch it. I'm reaching out, just brushing my fingertips against the cool stone. Whoa, it's not cool. There's a faint warmth radiating from it, traveling up my arm, and as my fingers make contact, the vibration under my feet gets even stronger. The lines, I swear they're shifting, rearranging themselves into patterns I can't decipher. It's like a language I don't understand. But I feel Italiano. I don't know why, but I just whispered, "Are you alive?" I didn't expect an answer, but the chamber, it responde. Not with a voice, not with any movement I can see, but with a feeling, a sense of understanding. The vibration changed. It's hard to explain, but it felt like the cave heard me, like it acknowledged my question. It's flowing through the floor and into the carvings themselves. A sudden draft of cool air just swirled around me, making the shadows flicker and dance on the walls. And in that flickering light, the shapes are changing. What looked like abstract patterns before now almost look like figures. Figures moving, frozen in stone, but somehow full of motion. I feel like I'm being watched, not by eyes, but by a memory. A consciousness locked within the rock. My heart is pounding in my chest. This is both terrifying and absolutely fascinating. I'm taking a step back, trying to process this. But the carvings don't stop. They keep shimmering, almost impatiently. It's like they're urging me to see something more, to understand what they're trying to show me. They want me to get it. Wait. Something just shifted under my feet. It was a small depression, like the ground itself is adjusting to my presence. The chamber feels bigger now, deeper. The walls seem to be stretching away from me, fading into a darkness my flashlight can't penetrate. I am getting the distinct feeling that this cave does unwant me to just pop in and out. It wants my attention. It wants respect. It wants me to stay and observe. This is a lot to take in, I think. I think I need to get out of here for a minute, just to clear my head. I'm slowly turning around, tracing my steps back toward the entrance tunnel. With every step I take away from that central carving, the vibration eases up a little. The light from my flashlight starts to look normal again, just illuminating plain, ordinary rock. But that central carving, it still burned into my mind's eye. Vivid, patient. It feels like it's waiting for me to come back. Okay, I'm back outside. The forest air feels so normal, so real. Looking at the entrance now, it just looks like a dark opening in the hillside. No vibration, no shimmering light, no feeling of being watched. Just stone, roots, and shadows. You'd never know what's inside. But I know. I carry that feeling with me now. The carvings are alive, in their own strange, ancient way. And I have a feeling that a part of me will stay in that chamber forever. What just happened? I need to think about this. This is bigger than just an old cave. This is something else entirely. What do you all think is going on? Drop your theories in the comments below, because I need some help figuring this out. Don't forget to like and subscribe, because I promise you, we are going back and we have to. I entered the forest just before twilight. The air was thick with the smell of pine and damp earth. Shadows stretched long and thin between the trunks, and the undergrowth whispered faintly as a light wind moved through it. On the surface, everything seemed completely normal, familiar even, but deep down, I could sense something else, something waiting. The moment I stepped deeper, taking my first few steps off the well-worn trail, the forest shifted. It was subtle, almost imperceptible at first. Paths I had walked 100 times before now seemed slightly different. The angles of the ancient trees felt just a little bit off, and I noticed a large, fallen branch in a place where it had never been before. The air itself felt heavier, warmer, almost sentient, as if it was actively responding to my presence. I paused, holding my breath, and listened. I strained my ears for any unusual sounds, anything out of the ordinary. But there was nothing, only the normal creak of branches overhead, the gentle rustle of leaves underfoot. Yet, the forest felt alive in a way I had never experienced. It was as if it were aware not just of my physical presence, but of my state of mind, my very consciousness. It felt like every movement I made, every breath I drew in and let out, was being mirrored in the profound silence that surrounded me. I decided to walk slowly, cautiously, testing the air, trying to understand this strange phenomenon. As I moved, I noticed the small changes more clearly, tiny shifts in the underbrush that seemed to follow my gaze, the subtle sway of trees that should have been perfectly still in the windless air. I even heard the quiet echo of leaves brushing against each other when there was absolutely no breeze. And then it hit me. The forest was responding to me. It wasn't just a passive environment. It was an active participant in my journey. When I moved quickly, my heart pounding with a mix of fear and excitement. The shadows around me deepened and the paths seemed to narrow, becoming more claustrophobic. But when I paused, taking a moment to gather myself, the forest seemed to exhale with me. The leaves on the trees trembled gently, as if acknowledging my stillness. It was uncanny. My own heartbeat seemed to sync with something ancient and primal in the woods, a rhythm far older than any trail or man-made clearing. I decided to test this theory further. I found a soft patch of moss, cushioned by centuries of fallen pine needles, and I lay down. As I settled onto the forest floor, the woods around me seemed to lower their volume. The constant lullaby hum of nature quieted completely, embracing the stillness I offered. My own slow, deep breath became the only perceptible movement, the only sound, and in response, the massive trees swayed just slightly, in perfect rhythm with my breathing, as though they were sleeping right alongside me. It was a profoundly peaceful and deeply unsettling experience. When I finally rose to my feet, the forest shifted again. Instantly, paths reoriented themselves subtly. The pale moonlight angled differently through the canopy, and shadows stretched in new, unfamiliar directions. It was undeniably alive, not alive like an animal or a plant, but alive like a vast, interconnected consciousness, one that was tuned to motion, presence, and attention. I walked to the edge of a small clearing I knew well. The moonlight pooled there, silver and soft, illuminating the space like a natural spotlight. As I stood at its edge, I felt a pulse under my feet. It was gentle, rhythmic, like the steady heartbeat of the forest itself. It had not just observed me, it had matched me. It had mirrored my rhythms, slept when I was still, and awakened the moment I moved. In that moment, I understood. This forest was not bound by the normal rules of day and night. It did not rise with the sun and fall with the moon. It rose and fell with those who entered its domain. And as the night deepened around me, casting the world in shades of indigo and black, I realized something else. This forest was patient. It was waiting for me to move, waiting for me to rest, waiting for me to eventually leave. Or perhaps, just perhaps, it was waiting for me to stay, to become a part of its rhythm forever. I continued deeper into the forest, careful to move slowly, almost cautiously, aware that every step, every breath, was mirrored in the world around me. The paths shifted subtly beneath my feet, the trees leaning inward just slightly as if observing me. I paused to touch the bark of a tall pine. The rough texture pressed against my palm, yet I felt something mar a warmth, a rhythm, a pulse that seemed to match my own heartbeat. It was faint at first, subtle, but unmistakable. As I walked, I realized the forest adjusted to me in real time. When I quickened my pace, shadows lengthened unnaturally. The underbrush thickened, paths twisted. When Primatus lowered, the forest exhaled softly, leaves trembling gently, a breeze flowing that hadn't existed a moment before. This wasn't just my imagination playing tricks on me. It was a call and response, a dance between me and this ancient place. Every move I made, it had a countermove. I decided to test it. I started walking in a deliberately erratic pattern, taking 2 quick steps forward, 1 slow step back, then sidestepping to the left. The forest reacted instantly. Thorny bushes seemed to spring up where my path had been clear just a second ago. A low-hanging branch dipped down, forcing me to duck. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. It was as if the forest was getting frustrated with my unpredictable rhythm, trying to herd me to, control me, to make me conform. So I stopped. I stood perfectly still, closed my eyes, and just breathed. Inhale, exhale. I tried to clear my mind of everything except the feeling of the ground beneath my feet and the air on my skin. After a long moment, the forest seemed to relent. The thorny bushes receded, the branch lifted, and a warm, gentle light filtered back through the leaves. It was teaching me its language, and the first word was harmony. To walk here, you had to walk asterisk with asterisk, it, not against it. I reached a small glade. Moonlight filtered through the canopy, illuminating the moss-covered ground. like a spotlight on a stage. The forest fell utterly silent. Yet, I could feel it, watching, waiting, responding. This wasn't the silence of emptiness, it was the silence of anticipation, the kind of quiet you feel just before a symphony begins. I knelt, pressing my hand flat into the soft, cool moss, and the pulse beneath me intensified. It was not the earth's faint tremor, it was the forest itself. It breathed with me, slept with me, stirred with me. The sensation was overwhelming. An intimacy never known. It was like feeling the heartbeat of a massive, living creature that had welcomed me into its very core. I realized that every forest I had ever walked through was ordinary only because I had ignored its rhythm. I had been a tourist, a passerby, never a participant. This one, acknowledged me, matched me. It lived in synchrony with my presence. The realization sent a shiver down my spine, but it wasn't one of fear. It was one of awe, of belonging, feeling an irresistible pull. I lay down in the moss. The ground was surprisingly comfortable, molding to my body as if it were made for me. As I settled, the forest seemed to settle around me. Shadows softened into gentle curves. The leaves stilled their rustling. The air became warmer, protective, patient. For a moment, I felt entirely safe, entirely understood, as if the forest were a living guardian, aware of every thought in my mind and every beat of my heart, waiting alongside me. I could have stayed there forever, wrapped in that green, living embrace. I felt the tension leave my shoulders, the anxieties of the outside world melting away into the moss and soil. The forest was a sanctuary, but a dynamic one that actively cared. After what felt like both an eternity and a single moment, I knew I had to move on. When I rose to my feet, the forest shifted again. Paths that had been straight now curved gently away. Small clearings that I hadn't noticed before rearranged themselves. The light fell differently through the branches, creating new patterns on the forest floor. The world had adjusted to me once more, remaking itself based on my short rest. It was showing me a new way forward, a path created by my stillness. I understood then that leaving the forest was not about retracing steps or following a map. There were no maps here. Leaving was about timing, movement, and awareness. It was a negotiation. To find your way out, you had to maintain the harmony. Step wrong, hesitate too long, or ignore its rhythms and it would no longer mirror you, it would trap you. Not out of malice, but simply because you were no longer in sync. You'd be speaking a different language, lost in translation, wandering in circles, while the exit was just a single, synchronized step away. I began to walk slowly back toward the edge, where I remembered the trees thinning. I focused on my breathing, on the feeling of my feet connecting with the earth, on the subtle pulse that still resonated through the ground. The pulse of the forest followed me, a quiet, constant reminder that I had been noticed, recorded in the rhythm of its life. It wasn't an escort in the traditional sense. It was more like a resonance, a vibration that I carried with me, guiding my steps. The forest wasn't just a place I was in. It was a consciousness I was a part of. As I neared the edge, the trees grew farther apart, and the familiar light of the open sky appeared ahead. The pulse grew fainter, not abruptly, but fading gently like the end of a song. It was letting me go, and when I finally emerged into the open night, stepping out from under the canopy, the forest behind me seemed ordinary once again, silent, still, unmoving. Just a collection of trees silhouetted against the moon. Tuan Yo Nils. It would look like any other woodland at night. But I knew better. I turned back one last time, and for a fleeting second, I thought I saw a flicker of light deep within the woods. A final, silent goodbye. Yet in Sidme, I carried its heartbeat. It was a part of me now, a quiet rhythm beneath my own. My perspective of the world had been fundamentally altered. I would never be able to walk through a park or a wood without wondering, without listening, without feeling for that hidden pulse. Some forests sleep and wake with the sun. Some forests sleep and wake with the moon. And some forests, the truly ancient and aware ones, The first thing I noticed was the absence. Not the absence of light or movement, but the absence of sound, even from a distance. Standing before I even reached the edge of the trail, the forest seemed quiet in a way that just defied all expectation. Birds did not call. The wind did not move through the trees. Even my own footsteps felt strangely muted as I approached the trailhead. I took a deep breath and stepped onto the path. Immediately, the muffling effect deepened, becoming almost tangible. Every crunch of leaves under my boots, every snap of a twig, every single breath I drew seemed to be swallowed whole before it could even reach the air. This forest was wrapped in a thick, profound silence. It felt patient, ancient, and utterly suffocating in its completeness. I had to test it. I called out, my voice feeling thin and weak. "Hello!" No echo returned. Not even a hint of one. There wasn't even a subtle shift in the air to suggest my voice had traveled at all. It felt like the words were trapped in my throat, absorbed before they even left my lips. This was a whole new level of quiet. I moved forward cautiously, a growing unease settling in my stomach. The forest around me felt alive, like it was watching, measuring me. The trees, ancient and massive, seemed to lean slightly toward the trail, not in a threatening way, but with a kind of intense attention. Their trunks were wide, dark, and utterly silent. Shadows pooled in unnatural, inky black shapes, absorbing what little light managed to filter down from the overcast sky. I bent down and picked up a fallen branch. Holding it in both hands, I put all my strength into it and snapped it in two. The sound of it breaking simply did not exist. I felt the tension and the release in my hands. I saw the two pieces separate, but the sharp crack I expected never came. Only the weight of the wood in my hands was real. It was in that moment that I realized this forest didn't just mute sound. It took it. It was actively storing it in some patient, deliberate way. All the sounds that should have been their voices, movements, echoes, they were all being absorbed, leaving absolutely nothing behind. It was a thief of noise. I had to test this theory further. I brought my hands together and clapped, as hard as I could. The impact was there, a jolt up my arms, but the sharp report of the clap was completely absent. It was like clapping into a vacuum. I then whispered my name. It didn't travel an inch. I felt the vibration in my own chest, but the air around me remained perfectly still, undisturbed. I found a small, smooth pebble on the path, picked it up, and dropped it. Nothing. No clink, no thud, just the silent sight of it hitting the dirt. The forest waited, aware, patient. It didn't react quickly. It didn't seem to judge. It simply collected. Every single noise that entered its domain became a part of it. A memory held somewhere deep in the dark roots, in the rich soil, in the silent, unmoving canopy high above. I felt compelled to walk deeper. The trail narrowed, and the trees grew closer, their branches interlocking overhead, creating a dense, green ceiling. The shadows pooled even more thickly at their bases, almost seeming to breathe. The silence became heavier with every step, pressing in on me like a physical weight. It was a pressure against my eardrums, a stillness that made my own heartbeat sound like a drum in the vast emptiness. I felt each footfall as though my body alone was the sole producer of sound in a world that had otherwise gone completely silent. And then I noticed it. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, a low hum, not in my ears, but resonating deep within my chest. It felt like a distant, forgotten memory surfacing. This vibration wasn't coming from me, and it didn't feel like it was coming from the forest itself. Not directly anyway. It was something stored, something ancient, vibrating gently, as if it was waiting for recognition. A sudden, chilling understanding washed over me. This forest didn't just swallow sound, it remembered it. And perhaps, just perhaps, someday, it would decide to return it all at once. I moved cautiously along the trail, my every step deliberate, my senses on high alert. Each footfall pressed softly into the damp earth of the forest floor, yet no sound followed. It was as if the ground itself was made of velvet, absorbing any hint of my presence. My own breathing, which I tried to keep slow and measured, seemed to vanish into the thick, heavy air before it could even reach my ears. The silence was absolute, a profound, weighty stillness that felt ancient and patient, as if the forest itself had been waiting for my arrival for a very, very long time. I decided to test the limits of this bizarre phenomenon again. I called out, but softly this time, my voice barely a whisper. "Is anyone here?" The words formed, left my lips, and then nothing. There was no reply. Of course, but more than that, there was no echo, not even the faintest reverberation. It was like speaking into a void. There was no sense of movement in the trees, no vibration carried through the air. Even the wind, which had been a gentle companion moments ago, had completely ceased. The forest seemed timeless, frozen in this perfect absence of sound, yet hyper-aware of every tiny motion I made. It was a deeply unsettling paradox. I bent down, my fingers brushing against the cool, damp leaf litter, and picked up a small, dry twig. Holding it between my thumb and forefinger, I applied pressure. It snapped cleanly in two. I felt the break, saw the two halves separate in my hand, but no noise escaped. The act existed only in my own perception, a physical sensation without an auditory component. Nothing else in this silent world acknowledged it. It was a secret between me and the twig. The deeper I ventured into the woods, the heavier the silence became. It was no longer just a passive absence of sound. It began to feel like a physical pressure. It pressed against my eardrums, creating a strange, full sensation. It pressed against my chest, making each breath feel more laborious. It pressed against my very sense of self, isolating me in a world where my own existence felt unverified by the sounds I should be making. This silence was a presence, a living entity, deliberate, patient, and watchful. I had the distinct feeling that it was recording everything, holding on to every silent footstep, every noiseless snap of a twig, remembering. Driven by a strange compulsion, I whispered my own name. The letters formed on my lips. My tongue moved against my teeth, but the sound did not travel. It was born and died in the same instant. Yet, in that moment, I felt something else. It was a subtle, almost imperceptible vibration that seemed to run faintly under my skin, like the distant memory of every sound I had ever made, every word I had ever spoken, being catalogued and filed away by an unseen archivist. The forest was not just erasing sound, it was collecting it. I stopped dead in my tracks, a new kind of awareness dawning on me. I looked around and noticed the trees. They seemed to be leaning in slightly closer than before. Their dark, ancient trunks forming narrow, winding corridors around me. The path ahead was no longer clear. Shadows pooled in unnatural, inky patches, thickening in places where no light should have been blocked. It was as if the darkness itself was growing, fed by the silence. And then I felt it, a pulse, rising from the ground beneath my feet. It was slow, deliberate, rhythmic, like a gigantic heartbeat woven into the very roots and soil of this place. The pulse was silent, of course, but I felt its steady thrum through the soles of my boots, a profound and undeniable confirmation that the forest was alive. It was not just a collection of trees and plants, it was a single, breathing organism, and its lifeblood was silence. I continued forward, but my pace had slowed. I was cautious, almost afraid to move too quickly to make any sudden gestures. Each step felt noted. Each breath felt absorbed. A new understanding began to form in my mind. The forest's patience had limits. It had tolerated my intrusion so far, observing me with a detached curiosity. But I was a foreign element, a creature of sound in a world of silence, and it was acutely aware that I could disrupt its carefully maintained balance. The feeling of being a guest was rapidly being replaced by the feeling of being an intruder. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of walking through the suffocating stillness, I reached a small clearing. Here, a sliver of moonlight managed to filter faintly through the dense canopy above, casting a pale, ethereal glow on the mossy ground. In this small pocket of light, the silence seemed less oppressive, less physically crushing, but I could still feel it pressing at the edges of the clearing, a tangible wall of quiet that contained this small sanctuary. It was a warning, a clear message. Leave now. or at the very least, move carefully, tread lightly. It was in that clearing, bathed in the faint moonlight, that I finally understood. This forest did not merely swallow sound. It was not a void. It was a repository. It collected sounds, storing them away like memories. It observed all who passed through its domain, cataloging their silent movements and their stolen voices. It was patient, endlessly patient, waiting for the right moment, for the right reason, to return what it had gathered. What would that sound like? The release of a century of silence, a cacophony of stored noises unleashed all at once. The thought sent a shiver down my spine. I left the clearing slowly, my heart pounding a silent rhythm against my ribs. I stepped as softly as I could, retracing my path back toward the edge of the woods. As I emerged from the tree line, the familiar sounds of the world rushed back to greet me. The gentle whisper of the wind in the trees, the distant call of a night bird, the satisfying rustle of leaves under my feet. The world was alive with noise again, and I had never been so grateful for it. But something inside me had changed. I carried a piece of the forest's memory with me, a deep, patient silence that had observed me, counted my heartbeats, and would remember me long after I was gone. Some forests carry the wind. Some carry the footsteps of countless travelers. But this forest swallows sound, and it never, ever forgets. Thank you for joining me on this journey. If you enjoyed this story, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss what happens next. Until next time, stay curious. And as our story fades into the night, I hope the shadows felt gentle and the silence kind. If your eyes are feeling heavy, let them close. Let the echoes of this tale drift quietly away with your thoughts. If you've found comfort here tonight, you're always welcome to return. New stories will be waiting for you just beyond the dark. Feel free to like the video or subscribe if this space brings you peace, but only when it feels right for you. Until next time, rest well, sleep deeply, and remember, even in the quiet darkness, you are never alone.